Miami's look like two different teams this year. Will they return to their early season form or continue to regress? Mario Cristobal's first season at Coral Gables was less than ideal, but to give him credit, he wasn't slow to admit fault. Well, not really his own fault, but mostly fault in who he decided to hire the year before. But still, fault was admitted, and the Canes made some big offseason moves in hiring both a new offensive and defensive coordinator. Through the first month of the season, both of these changes seemed to really hit the spot. The offense was third in yards per play, and the defense backed that up with good numbers of their own. This all culminated in a dominant showing against a top 25 Texas A&M squad. Miami's only problem was that the season didn't end at the end of September. And since that date, their defense has still remained a solid unit through ACC play, but their offense has started to look like the lethargic group that took the field in 2022. So that leads me to a natural question. Was the firing offensive coordinator Josh Gaddis just a move to get heat off of Cristobal's back? How much control does the offensive coordinator actually have in Cristobal's system? I'll let you decide this on your own. Here's a chart that compares all of the routes run for a team over a season. Each row represents either the 2022 Miami, 2023 Miami, or 2022 Houston, where Miami's current offensive coordinator Shannon Dawson coached last season, and I'll reveal which team goes to which row in a second. First, take a second and see which rows seem most similar to you. To me, I see a low amount of crossing routes and a similarly high amount of outs and hitches run in the bottom two rows. So to me, I think the same guy probably coordinated these two offenses. If you agree, you might be surprised to see, like I was, that these are Miami and Houston's teams, not the two Miami teams. This means Shannon Dawson seems to have at least some control over the passing game. Just for kicks, I decided to do the same exercise for Maryland, where Miami's last OC ended up. This further verified it. Miami in 2022 resembles this year's Maryland squad in their passing distribution way more than they do this season's Miami team. This sort of surprised me. Tyler Van Dyke looked all-world in 2021 and has struggled the previous 2 years. I thought it was obvious that the only constant was Cristobal himself, but it seems at least for the passing game, he's had two distinct coordinators. Before we get too far, let's spend a second on the nuts and bolts of his current passing game. 3 routes make a majority of their passing game: hitches, wide receiver screens, and go routes, which I'll talk more about later. As for hitches and screens, they're about as standard as one would expect. Most of the hitches came off basic spacing concepts where there's multiple hitches stretching the defense horizontally. Often these are jazzed up a little bit with crossing routes at the release, but they are what they are. They also seem to run a fair amount of hitches that look like go routes that then convert to comebacks if they have soft coverage. Receiver screens have also been kind of good for them. They ran a ton of them against Clemson with a backup quarterback Emory Williams, who may get the start again for Miami on Saturday. If that's the case, I expect this to again to be a staple. They especially like getting the ball to Jacoby George and hybrid receiver tailback Brashard Smith as a way to get them moving out in space. So that's a good portion of the passing game. They tend to keep the throws kind of conservative, except for some shots, which again, I'll talk about in more detail later. Before we get there though, I had to check if the same coordinator situation held true for the running game. Again, I have 2022 Houston compared to 2022 and 2023 Miami. See which ones seem most similar to you. If you said the top two, I would have to agree with you. Weirdly enough, these are actually the two Miami teams. So it seems like Cristobal lets offensive coordinators have autonomy over the passing game, but not the running game. But interestingly enough, the run game is the most consistent part of their offense. As you can see, they run a ton of man runs. What that usually means in the modern era is they run a play called duo. Duo is usually run to the tight end side. He typically blocks out the end man on the line of scrimmage, and the offensive linemen then double team away from that block. Unlike inside zone, where those double teams would try to reach the linebackers, duo typically leaves them unblocked. Since usually there's not enough linebackers for gaps, then it's up to the running back to run through whichever gap is empty. And good backs can create empty gaps like this one, where he jab steps outside, which resets the feet of this backer just enough to open up the crease he wants to hit. Duo is a tough play to defend with good backs because it really doesn't ask a ton from the offensive line, who really just need to hold double teams. There are really only 2 ways to stop this duo play of theirs. Either you bring enough numbers to fill all the gaps, but that leaves you on islands outside, or you take advantage of the few one-on-ones you get and get penetration to stop the run in the backfield. Both of these options are easier said than done, but since Miami's passing game hasn't shown to be too big of a threat, it's allowed opponents to stack the box a bit. Remember when I talked about the passing game and it seemed pretty basic short routes? Well, if they do hit their deep balls, this offense can kind of be dangerous. The only problem is they've only really done that against one Power 5 team this season. Miami's offensive performance against Texas A&M is looking more and more like an outlier by the day. On passes that traveled over 15 yards in the air, they were 4 for 5 for 29.2 yards per attempt and 3 touchdowns. On those same throws for the rest of the Power 5 games they've played, they've been atrocious, completing only 26% of those passes for 8.6 yards per attempt. In addition, they were much better at getting yards after the catch when they did complete their passes. They netted almost double their second highest mark on the season in that game. A lot of this has to do with them simply winning one-on-ones to the outside, and one pretty remarkable catch by their do-it-all receiver Xavier Restrepo. A lot of the blame since this game has come at the hands of Tyler Van Dyke, who certainly should hold a large portion of it. He's been inaccurate and frankly has some straight-up stinkers where it seems like he forgets which color jersey he's throwing to. But to be honest, he hasn't had much help. Since the start of October, 11% of attempts have been incomplete because the receivers have been unable to get separation, which puts them at 111th in the country. Because of these passing struggles, this offense really hasn't been good down the stretch, but their running game is enough to give teams pause. Most teams have to devote some resources to stopping it, and if that allows Miami to hit a shot or two, then they could pressure the Noles, especially with what they have brewing on the other side of the ball. Unlike the Dawson experiment, I think most would consider the hiring of Lance Guidry as defensive coordinator as an unmitigated success. That unit has been a legit top 25 unit this season, regardless of what month they're playing in. This defense starts and stops with its line. Despite being down 2 players, they boast the 4th highest pressure rate in the country. They're able to do this without blitzing much, and most of that has to do with the breakout rookie campaign of Rueben Bain at defensive end. And when teams start paying too much attention to him, then veteran Leonard Taylor has a chance to feast up the middle. Behind them are some linebackers who specialize in run stopping and a secondary that tends to be physical and aggressive. They play a ton of what's called man free, with man across the board and 1 deep safety, and a hole player that either sits in rat coverage in the middle of the field or can be used on blitzes. Their coverage has been decent too, but it's really hard to disentangle their coverage abilities from the fact that they've had a lot of help from extremely high pressure rates. Overall, this defense has been a really tough unit to score on. Really, the only 2 teams to find success have been UNC's run game and Clemson's pass game. There were really 2 reasons for UNC's run success. Firstly, they were able to catch Miami a couple of times in 2 high shells, where they were able to get numbers in the box. They also broke off some chunks because Miami came on blitzes with bad gap integrity. Here's a good example of that. This weak side backer reads run early, but both linebackers are flowing with the tight end's motion. This leaves 3 Miami defenders for this side of the ball and no one for the cutback lane backside. Clemson, on the other hand, was able to move the ball through the air, which hasn't been their strong suit this season. They mostly did that because Miami felt like they could man up on Clemson's receivers all game. And while they lost some one-on-one matchups, especially to this tight end on some safeties, it wasn't enough to let Clemson out of Hard Rock without a loss. If I were a betting man, I would say Miami does the same against FSU. I think they'll play a lot of man, load the box, take away the run. If JT can consistently make throws on the perimeter with pressure bearing down on him, then I think FSU's offense will cruise. But there's a non-zero chance that some of those deep balls fall flat and FSU goes stretches without much offense. Ultimately, however, I just don't see Miami having the depth to keep up with FSU for 4 quarters. FSU is a team that tends to get better as they wear opponents down, and Miami is a team that consistently gets worn down. You can see that as games go on, Miami tends to give up more explosives, culminating in a 4th quarter average that sees 17% of opposing plays going for explosive yardage. To me, that might be the story of the game. This Miami team is improved, but a lackluster offense and a defense that's been whittled down makes it hard to compete against a top 5 team at home. But honestly, this is FSU versus Miami. There's only one thing that's certain in these games, that both teams will give it everything they have. Thanks for watching. Miami fans, if you're here, thanks for sticking it through. Please let me know what I missed about your team. FSU fans, please like and subscribe and join me over on Noles 247 while I'll be furthering this conversation. Thanks.